It's Pastor Dave here from Wheatley Baptist Church and my wife, the Reverend Marley Page. And we're up next on this Lenten journey, week 5 of the journey to the cross. And today we're going to share with you the account of Jesus before Pilate. And a really interesting account, because what you're going to see here is a real turn of the tables, so to speak. Pilate doesn't get what he expects here, and Jesus is working on very much what he wants, and we'll share that with you here in just a minute. But before we do that, I want to read this account. So I'm going to read from the Gospel of John. You can find this account in all 4 Gospels, but I'm going to read from the Gospel of John. So this is chapter 18, verses 28 to 40. It's titled Jesus Before Pilate. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by Jewish leaders, but now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this, he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of the Passover. Do you want me to release the King of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising.
So we see here in this passage that Jesus easily turned the tables on Pilate. We read the exchange beginning in verse 33. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" In all 4 Gospels, the "you" is very emphatic. Although this is a legal question and Pilate was trying to get the whole story right from Jesus' mouth, he was excited and wanted to know what Jesus' answer was. So it was, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Like, you? It was no wonder Pilate reacted this way. Jesus came to him. He was in his everyday peasant-type clothing. They would have been stained with blood and sweat from Gethsemane. His features were already starting to swell from getting banged up. But despite all appearances, Jesus was still the king. And no one was going to turn the tables on him unless he chose for that to happen. But here we see that Jesus turned them on Pilate. "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked. "Or did others talk to you about me?" In other words, what about you? Who are you to question who I am? This question cut right through Pilate. But you know what? Jesus was after Pilate's heart. He wanted to know him. But it was Pilate who was truly on trial.
It was. And I think Pilate knows this, because you see in verse 35 here, he says, "Am I a Jew?" He says, "It was your people that and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it that you have done?" But this is like a smoke screen, and frankly, it's not a very good one, because Jesus jumps right in after him, and he says, "My kingdom is not of this world," right? "If it were, then my servants would fight for me. They'd prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." And you see what's happening. Jesus is saying, "Oh yeah, I'm a king," right? He's proclaimed himself to be a spiritual king. And a spiritual king doesn't rule by material force, right? And Jesus had just proven this fact. Think about this. Earlier that night in Gethsemane, Peter swings his sword and he takes off Malchus's ear, and Jesus actually heals that. Okay, Jesus, his kingdom is from another place. He's establishing himself as a spiritual king in this way.
So what a contrast, truly, right? We see Jesus, the spiritual king, and then we see Pilate, the material king. Two completely different approaches to life, and it just becomes so evident in this passage, right?
Yeah, and we really want you to see this. So think about this setting right now. You have Jesus and you have Pilate. Pilate, who's the one that would do anything to receive, power, honor, and glory. These are all the things of Rome. And then you have Jesus, the one who actually gave up real power and real glory and came to earth to be with us.
True, truly. You've got Pilate, who he only held value to things he could touch and taste and smell, the things that were tangible in his hands. And then you've got Jesus, who had no cares for that. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about what he had or having the best food and wine. Those were the least of the things he was concerned about.
Yeah, his riches were with his Father in heaven. Think about this. Pilate and the Rome that Pilate represented, they ruled by like material manipulation, right? They ruled by stuff and by gold and by armor. Jesus, on the other hand, he kind of laments. We find this in a lot of cases. Earlier in John chapter 6, John writes, as Jesus says, "You are looking for me not because you saw miraculous signs, but because you ate the loaves and had your fill." Like he's really indicting us as people about this issue of materialism, just like he's indicting Pilate here.
For sure. And I'm sure in this situation too, Pilate was probably, dressed in all his fancy stuff. He could have been on the cover of GQ, and he was all put together. And here is Jesus, as we had already talked about. He was not in the greatest, physical shape coming before him right now. And it says in Isaiah 53 that he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. That was not what he was known for. He wasn't the hot-looking guy that showed up, in town.
No, but there was something about Jesus. And, some of what that was Jesus's confession, I think here, that kind of unveils for Pilate, and really for us through John's gospel, this ideal truth, this supreme truth, this truth of all truths, right? That he is a spiritual king from another kingdom. And what happens here is Pilate kind of makes this confession on his own, revealing this truth about himself too.
Yeah, for sure.
And so Pilate says, well, what is truth? And in verse 38 here, he says, what is truth? And it's really important to kind of understand the tone of what he's saying here. What is truth? Because I think Pilate's worried. He's certainly not joking. He may have been a little bit of sarcastic. He certainly wouldn't be smiling at this point. And kind of whatever the exterior front that he was putting on, I think he was certainly confused. And I even think he might have been despairing a little bit here. And here's why I say this. Think about Pilate. Pilate was this materialistic, hungry person chasing, the Roman fantasy of power and celebrity status. I mean, he would have had celebrity status. He would have access to all kinds of pleasure and wealth. But, I think in this very moment, there's probably, some of his wife's, remember earlier, she has this spiritual premonition about the mystical authority of Christ, I think some of that may be coming back to Pilate here. We know he didn't truly want an answer because he didn't really wait for one, right? He just powers on here.
Yeah, exactly. Pilate exemplifies our modern world today.
He does.
All about materialism, what we have, what feels good, what's right, and stuff. And with his what is truth, Pilate stood completely transparent and probably somewhat vulnerable before Christ. as the whole world does.
Yeah, it's true. Pilate knows Jesus is innocent here. There's no doubt in my mind about this, and I think in that understanding, he's doing his very best here to try and escape the responsibility of this. You can read this throughout the Gospels, right? And so what does he do? He sends Jesus off to Herod. He's passing the buck for sure.
We're hoping to pass the buck,
he
right?
recognizes Jesus as a Galilean, and so he says, okay, way you go, off to Herod. And when Jesus is with Herod, he doesn't do any miracles, right? And Herod, being the cruel guy that he is, basically just has Jesus beat up again and sends him back to Pilate, right? Not at all what Pilate wanted.
No, not at all what Pilate wanted. So I imagine that Pilate was feeling very discouraged that, Herod had sent Jesus back because he was hoping Herod would take care of it and kind of, as we see later, wash his hands of the situation. He was hoping to do that sooner because Pilate was at a loss of what to do. But then he remembered a special Jewish tradition that could perhaps save him and make it so that he truly didn't have to make the final decision. So each Passover, the Jewish people were permitted to ask for the freedom of one prisoner. It was a symbolic act to remind them how God mercifully delivered them all from bondage in Egypt. So Pilate gave them a choice. Here is Jesus or here is Barabbas. You make the choice and decide who would be free. And knowing that Jesus was innocent, he was hoping that they would choose Jesus.
He really was. Pilate gives them this choice, Jesus or Barabbas, and here we're introduced, to Barabbas. Barabbas was a robber. He was a rebel. He was a murderer. The Gospel of Matthew says he was a notorious prisoner. And Pilate thought that, look, if I give the Jews a choice here, then they're certainly going to pick Jesus, right? Because everybody knows what Barabbas is. And I think in many ways he probably stood up there kind of self-congratulating himself with, this is going to be a no-brainer. They're going to pick Jesus and I'm going to be out of trouble.
Yep.
But we know this didn't happen.
No, that did not get him off the hook.
No.
Certainly didn't play out the way he had hoped. So, but of course, as we know, the crowd chose Barabbas. Even in this matter, as we continue to see through this story, things were not as they seemed. They didn't play out the way they all thought they should have.
Yeah. I there's something here I don't want to be lost on you either. There's some real, I think, divine poetry here, if I could say it that way. Think about this word or this name, Barabbas. One of the early church fathers wrote about this, Origen. He tells us that Barabbas' name was actually Jesus Barabbas. And Jesus was a common name back there, so this isn't hard for us to believe in being true. Jesus Barabbas actually meant Jesus, son of a father. Interesting, right? That the crowd chose Barabbas, Jesus, son of a father, instead of Jesus, son of the Father. Yeah, I always thought that was interesting, And Origen, if you go on and read through how he writes about this, he just kind of summarized and said, look, this has always been the choice of the world, right? Of sinners, really. This has been their choice. Unfortunately, the world has this willingness to resort to things of the world, to materialism, maybe even to things like murder and theft, but they resort to anything but the truth which is Jesus, the truth which is our spiritual King, as Jesus has identified himself. And for us, I think that part of the message here is that this is the way of the world. And it's the way of our hearts before we come to Jesus, right? Interesting. Pilate asked, what is truth? So, what is the truth?
Christ is the true judge. But Christ didn't come as the conquering ruler like Pilate did. He comes to us when we are looking for a faith or a life whose foundation is in God.
Mhm.
Christ died in place of all of us who come to him. And you know what? He did that for Barabbas too. He took Barabbas's place. Jesus Christ has reversed the sentence for all of us, for all the believers. And you know, as we are heading ever closer to the cross, it's just a few days ahead of us. We're almost to Holy Week. It's time for us to stop and reflect on that truth and what it means.
It is, yeah. Hope you take some time to reflect on that on these days ahead. We'll continue to have some of these minuets for you during our Lenten seasons. Blessings, everybody.